Our free and equal story tonight. The Democratic Party has a long history of embracing socialist policies. But for the longest time, they kept quiet about their true intentions. We're not socialists, they'd say. We just believe in fairness and equality. But those days are done. With the rise of politicians like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrats are no longer hiding their socialist agenda. And if their recent attack on monuments and statues in Mount Rushmore are any indication, they're not hiding their anti-Americanism either. So how do we stop these socialists? How do we preserve our rights? Our next guest wrote a playbook for what conservatives must do to save our nation from the socialist left. So let's talk to him. Author of Saving America from Socialism, How to Stop Progressive Attacks on Freedom. He's a former U.S. Senator, Jim DeMint. Senator, thank you for joining me, sir.
Liz, thank you. And thank you for letting me talk with you about this whole idea of socialism, which is, if you understand what it is, it's hard to believe anyone would want it. The problem, though, is too many people don't understand how America really works and why it's so wonderful. And too many people don't understand the real threat of socialism. So that's why the book is coming out now, close to July 4th. And I appreciate you giving me a little time to talk to folks about it.
Of course, it's one of those things. I agree with your first statement that it's hard to imagine that anyone gets on board with socialism anymore, because I feel like it can be easily debunked with one question. In the history of the world, where has socialism ever actually worked? Where has it resulted in anything other than oppression, death, and tyranny? And socialists can't actually name a single country that fits that bill, and yet they want to bring it here. Senator, I think that's why they do try to camouflage their agenda and pretend that it's not socialism, even though the result would be a socialist society.
You're exactly right. In the book, Saving America from Socialism, we go through a lot of that history, and there is no example in the world where it's worked. Sometimes the Democrats will say Sweden, but then you start looking at it and you realize that a lot of these countries that had socialism 20 years ago have moved back towards free market capitalism and freedom. For years, they told us the Canadian health system worked better than ours because it was socialistic. But then we found so many of their rich people and political leaders were coming to America for their services. So it doesn't work, but it's more than just poor economics. Like you mentioned, millions of people have died because of the tyranny that comes through giving government too much power.
Right. I mean, in the 20th century, I believe the number is 100 million people have been killed by socialist, Marxist, or communist regimes throughout the world. That number, we're almost so used to hearing it that we're numb to what that means. But that is an unfathomable number of people who've lost their life. And that's not even counting the people who lost their liberty, their individual inherent God-given rights under socialist regimes. So in your book, you say it's a playbook for how to fight back against this. Step one is obviously understanding what socialism is, but how do we fight back against the radical left as they are clearly trying to wage a cultural revolution in our nation?
Well, the book goes through a lot of the points of how to recognize socialism when it's happening. And you could just look over the last few months. Whenever the left has an excuse, a crisis, they take more control. We've seen it with coronavirus. They tell us which businesses can open and which can't, where you can go, who you can associate with, whether you can go to church. If folks like that, they should know that that is very much what socialism is like. But the playbook gives us a lot of hope. We just have to understand that America was never about being a national democracy, and that folks are saying, let's get rid of the electoral college, let's let the majority rule. But when majority rule, the minority loses their rights. And it's foolish for minorities and the poor to think they're going to have more rights when the government gets more power. So the playbook includes recognizing that we're a republic. States need to make more of the decisions. They're not perfect, but at least now we can compare Florida with New York and how they handle the coronavirus and see what works and what doesn't. We need things like school choice, education savings accounts, so our kids won't continue to be indoctrinated by the government. The universities the same way. There's some simple things that we can point to that we know are working because they're working at the state level very often, or they've worked in the past for America. But people shouldn't give up. But if they don't fight, they're going to lose their freedom, and they won't know it's gone until it's too late.
Right, and I think it's very interesting, Senator, that you mentioned school choice, because it seems to me that in order to understand the devastation that socialism would bring to the United States, you have to know the history. I mean, what is the old saying that if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it? To understand socialism, you have to understand history, because right now, if you ask the vast majority of people, unfortunately in my age demographic, if you ask them whether or not they approve or support socialism, they say yes. They don't associate the word socialism with anything negative. So they're not on the lookout for it because they think it's a good thing. So it seems to me that the place that we need to start taking our country back is the education system, because it's failing our youth. It's failing to educate them about the history of the world.
Right. You're exactly right. And I guarantee you the majority of parents, if they had the choice, they would send their children to a school that taught about America, taught about how it worked, talk about character, how to prepare for the workforce, things that you don't hear in public schools very often today, and not even in our universities. So there's several strategies, again, and if Americans just think it's common sense, it's not conservative or liberal, what do we need to do to keep America on the right track and to retrieve those things that we've lost? So I feel an urgency about it because I've been writing about it and warning about it for 10 years. But now it's actually happening all around us. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, Democrats have come out of the closet. They're running as socialists. The socialists are beating other Democrats in primaries. They are out selling socialism, and the rest of us need to sell what really makes America work.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I encourage people to buy your book, Saving America from Socialism, How to Stop Progressive Attacks on Freedom. Senator Jim DeMint, thank you, sir, for being on the show. I appreciate it.